It seems that through the years, I've become endlessly fascinated with the Caribbean lifestyle. Most of all the islands I've been to, at a high level, seem very similar. But each island, when you get really down into it, are so uniquely different, and that's what makes them so special. Of course, the ultimate goal is to find that Caribbean island that's frozen in time. A time before the internet ruined it with over-tourism, where the seafood is caught fresh, served cheap, the beer is served cold, and a place that's not on any cruise destination list. And especially one where the reef and coral is pristine and fish are beautiful. Does it exist? I don't know. But the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras comes pretty damn close. Roatan, specifically on the west end, is not one of those common Caribbean destinations you hear about, well, unless you're my wife, who's known about this diving destination since she was a kid, flipping through those diving magazines. And let me tell you, the diving was incredible. The topography of nearly every reef follows that of a volcano, with the land above the surface being the top of said volcano, and underneath the waterline, the reef gently slopes away into the abyss below, with little canyons, steep walls, and wide ravines to explore along the way. Plus, the visibility was surprisingly good, especially for how windy it was in some of those days. Most days on the island were the same. Eat, dive, relax, sleep, and repeat. Wandering up and down the street along the beach, from one restaurant to the next, or grabbing a cold beer or margarita from our favorite watering holes like Sundowners, it didn't really get much better than that. Everywhere you look, it's a tropical paradise. And everybody we met was so friendly and kind that it was one of those places you immediately fall in love with. And it's especially great to hear when it can go either way with the locals having to deal with the tourists there all the time. Luckily, the dogs were friendly enough for everybody to get along with. The go-to wreck dive to hit from the west end of Roatan is El Agula, since it's only a 10-minute boat ride from the beach in front of the dive shop. On that short ride aboard the Uba Itza, our dive master Eddie gave us, well, the shortest and yet one of the most detailed briefings before a dive. El Agula is a 230-foot freighter that was sunken by one of the local dive resorts in the 90s to become an artificial reef. The boat sits in the blue depth of 110 feet, a depth that I'd yet to reach on any dive so far. Courtney entered the forward section ahead of me, watching her fins kick away from me and into the dark room of El Agula. Exactly as Eddie explained during our briefing, we would enter through the ceiling, which technically dropped us down a level in the boat, and we turned right and swam out the forward portion of the helm. Inside, I did not look around too much as I was focused on not hitting anything, especially not getting caught up on any of the metal structure. But the idea of being inside of a man-made structure on the bottom of the ocean floor, with coral growing in the walls and fish swimming around us, it was otherworldly. But I was relieved to say the least when I came out to the open water on the other side. Kicking away from the boat, the middle cargo hold of the ship had separated from the bow and the stern, and sprawled out on the sandy bottom floor. We watched a few of our dive group cruise along the bottom towards the bow when we stayed higher up in the water column to help avoid deco. And then it led us to the bow, nearing the end of our dive, and ultimately into one of the harder sections to dive through the ship. Hesitating to follow our dive master Eddie through the last door into another dark cabin, a few of us hung out outside the last porthole, but then we saw air bubbles escaping to the surface from Eddie's rig, and he emerged from the top side of the hatch. And that was all I needed to see before following in after him with my flashlight on, searching the dark room. The large square cabin had tons of ropes and other equipment on the floor, and the walls were now covered in a colorful coral. But I was quickly trying to focus on getting out of the room as soon as possible, and on the floor, a square beam of light lit up the floor, realizing the exit was above me. With a few kicks, and one hand on my inflator hose, and the other holding my camera above my head to protect my skull, I finally escaped the Agula. The walk from our hotel to town was only a half a mile, and we strolled along the street below the tropical trees that line the road. But better than the walk in the proximity to town was the walk that our hotel had into the ocean, down a set of stairs to some great snorkeling. The exposed rocky landscape did not lend itself to having a ton of coral, soft or hard, but it quickly made up for it with all these cool caves that we could dive through that were only about 10 feet deep and you could pop out the other end. Exploring these caves made for such a great afternoon, especially as the sun was setting and we were wrapping up our days.
So sick.
In the middle of the bay was the aptly named Eyesore. It's a floating jungle gym made from an old sailboat with a swinging rope and a rock climbing wall to jump off from into the ocean. Timing it right when it wasn't crowded with a bunch of the local kids, we were able to have some fun, but it did require a bit more exertion than expected after a week of diving and drinking some frozen drinks. What makes this diving destination special is two very unique features that I'd never seen anywhere else in all the Caribbean islands, even in the Southeast Asia. One, that they do fun dives here, which are really just normal dives, but you schedule and pay for each tank individually, and after each dive, you come back to shore. This leads me to number two, which is that all the dive sites were less than 100 yards from the shoreline surrounding the island, meaning you barely have enough time to get your BCD on your back before the boats arrive in the dive site. Normally, you're out on a boat for 30 to 60 minutes to reach a reef that's worth diving, and then you spend all morning or afternoon diving two separate times before returning to the dock, or, in this case, the beach in front of the dive shop. And the dive shop we went through for the whole time was Native Sun's dive shop. Though diving at night is no different than a normal dive, as far as your checks go and the setup go, it feels like a completely different world. Your entire visible scope is limited to the cone-shaped beam that's coming from your borrowed flashlight. Turning your head left or right doesn't really matter because there's nothing. It's black for miles in all directions. After Courtney spotted the first octopus as soon as we dropped down from the boat, midway through our dive, we saw another incredible sight, and that was another octopus navigating across the reef, most likely scared of the two divers gawking at it as we tried to avoid shining it directly with our light, but it was so neat to see it jump from one rock to another, then inflate, trying to be as large as possible and assume the shape of the reef before swimming off again and tucking behind more rocks. Along the way, we saw many lobsters hanging out underneath all the rocks, but there was one, and I swear it was over 3 feet long from tip to tail. Of course, hard to tell in the video for scale, but trust me, it was the largest lobster I had ever seen. And close to our return point, we saw an anemone. Like everything else, it was hunting. I had never seen an anemone actually go after fish that were swimming by, and all of our light was bringing in extra fish, so it was really getting fed well. A wild experience and a completely different one than we had earlier in the day, especially when some of our friends saw a Caribbean octopus, and I wish we saw that because that would have been amazing. Looking to explore more of the island, we wandered south down the road and then eventually onto a path that went along the beach and headed toward the popular West Bay. Known for its more tourist destination with all the resorts and banana boat rides you can ask for, well, the walk was brutally hot. We quickly realized we made the right decision when we saw all the crowds. West Bay, compared to where we were staying, was significantly busier. Still, the drinks were cold and the ocean was beautiful, so we were happy to go and stop by and see it, and then head back. For sure, this was a dive-centric trip. We were there to see a ton of incredible sights underneath the water, like octopus, turtles, banded shrimp, arrow crabs, and tons of fish and lobster as well. But this was the first dive trip that we went on that we really made friends with the other divers on the boat. We dove with them all week, which made up for anything the reef lacked. Between here and Cape Caulker, we talk about going back every year because we had so much fun and there was still so much to see above and below the waterline. Every day on the island was relaxing, and even though it was small, relatively speaking, a short car ride or scooter trek across the island, you could go explore for days on end. Which was more of a reason that we really didn't even need in the first place to come back and see it again. Thank you, Roatan.